Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. After weeks of hype and innuendo and threats and a lot of hysterics, we finally have the House Intelligence Committee memo in hand tonight. We're going to spend the next hour telling you about it, what's in it, what it means, what it tells us about how our leaders govern when we're not watching them. If you're a regular viewer, you know we rarely spend an entire show on a single topic. We think this is worth it. There's been so much lying about this memo by partisans in Congress and hyenas in the press that its lessons are at risk of being drowned out and lost. We think truth is the antidote to that. So to begin with, what does the memo actually say? Well, as it turns out, it's not primarily about Donald Trump or even about the broader Russia investigation. The memo is really the story of a semi-obscure Trump campaign volunteer called Carter Page, who back in 2016 was identified by the Obama administration as a secret agent of the Putin government. 4 times, FBI officials went to a federal surveillance court and argued they had probable cause to believe that Carter Page was working with Russian spies. He was an agent of a foreign government. 3 times, FBI Director Jim Comey personally signed off on this claim. Deputy Director Andrew McCabe and Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein put their names to it as well. So why were all of these officials so certain that Page, who was a Naval Academy graduate who has no criminal record, was betraying his country? Because we now know they were relying on the Trump dossier. That's the still unverified opposition research dump paid for by the RNC and the Hillary campaign and compiled by a British spy called Christopher Steele. The Trump dossier made spying on Carter Page possible. How are we sure of that? Because Andrew McCabe of the FBI said so behind closed doors under oath to Congress just this past December. Now, Democrats are now furiously denying that in anonymous leaks to sympathetic reporters, but it's obviously true. In a minute, we'll talk to a member of Congress who was in the room when McCabe said it. But ask yourself, if the FBI had powerful additional evidence that Page was a Russian spy, why did they include the dossier in their request at all? Indeed, why did they lead with it? The Trump dossier allowed our government to spy on Carter Page. That is not a talking point. It is a fact. And given that it's a fact, it is remarkable to learn that the FBI knew at the time that the dossier was unreliable, to put it charitably. An independent FBI unit analyzed that document and found its claims, quote, only minimally corroborated. The FBI also knew that the dossier's author, Christopher Steele, was an inflamed partisan working on behalf of political operatives trying to win a presidential race, you'll remember. Steele actually told DOJ employee Bruce Orr that he was, quote, desperate that Donald Trump not get elected and was passionate about him not being president. So assessing all of this, no rational person could in good faith treat the Trump dossier as fact. And yet that is exactly how the FBI presented it to the FISA court when they asked to spy on Carter Page. They never mentioned any of the facts we just gave you. They hid them. That is lying. There is no other way to describe it. They've been busted lying, but they won't admit it. Former FBI Director Jim Comey took to Twitter today not to apologize for any of this or even to address the facts the memo raised, but to mock the release of the memo, like the aspiring MSNBC contributor he apparently is. Dishonest and misleading, he said. He didn't bother to explain how it was dishonest and misleading. Of course he didn't. Comey, who leaked his notes on private meetings with the president in a petty revenge move after being fired, is now declaring it beyond the pale somehow for Congress to carry out its constitutional duties of oversight of the FBI. Comey apparently views the FBI as a fourth co-equal branch of government, not subject to the authority of the other 3. Suddenly, a lot of people in Washington seem to agree with him. The current FBI director, for example, the one that Trump chose, Christopher Wray, he apparently argued that the names of FBI officials in the memo ought to be redacted, hidden from public view. Why? How exactly would that serve the public interest? It would not serve the public interest. It would protect the FBI. And as always, that was the point. All of this should make you nervous, the dishonesty mixed with self-righteousness. Looking back, you wonder how many people at the FBI ever even believed, just for a moment even, that Carter Page was actually a Russian agent. They clearly don't believe that now. If they did, Page would be in handcuffs. Yet he's still a free man, though his civil liberties have been violated and his reputation has been destroyed. Democrats could not care less. They're still pretending that somehow Carter Page hurt this country. They know that's a lie, but Page himself or what happens to him in the future is all irrelevant to them. If he can be used to destroy a president they hate, they are happy to use him, even if he is crushed in the process. And that may be the real lesson of this memo, and it's the reason we're spending an hour on it tonight. 10 years from now, Donald Trump will be gone, and Democrats will have forgotten that they once pretended to fear Russia as a threat to our democracy or whatever. But our law enforcement and intelligence agencies will remain as long as this country stays intact, and we have got to trust them. We give them incredible powers, awesome powers, including the power to take human life, the most basic of all. We allow them, by the way, to operate in secrecy because they tell us they must. In exchange for all of that, we ask them to operate with integrity, to prove to us that they haven't become tools of a political regime, because always and everywhere, that is the temptation. And unfortunately, it looks like it just happened here.
All right, joining us now with reaction to the explosive memo detailing FISA abuses, President Trump's attorneys, also the chief counsel for the American Center for Law and Justice, Jay Sekulow. Jay, I'm calling this the biggest abuse of power corruption case in our lifetime. This was all designed to impact a presidential election and an incoming president, and to undermine an incoming president, and to undermine an election. I want to get your general thoughts first.
Yep. Well, you have to look at the timeline here, Sean, to show how dangerous the precedent that's been established by the FBI. James Comey and the FBI attempted to get a FISA warrant in the summer of 2016. They were not successful. They then moved in October by adding to their request the Steele dossier. Then they get a FISA warrant. So that FISA warrant is issued. In January, before the president was sworn in, James Comey, as FBI director, meets with the president, tells him about this, as his words were, salacious and unverified dossier, but said he's not, the president was not under investigation, and that not to worry about that. Yet 7 weeks before then, he obtained a FISA warrant based on that dossier. Then it was renewed a day before the inauguration, and then renewed subsequently again. And so when you look at just this, the chain of events, and that's what I want people to focus on, the timeline here is very, very not only dangerous, but I mean, what did they tell the FISA court? They didn't say this was political opposition research. They didn't say it was unverified. Chris Steele leaked the information to a media source. The FBI said they cut off formal relations with him. Did they tell that to the FISA judge? So I think the real issue here is both as to the nature of what they did, but also what they did to the court. And I think all that has to be reviewed, obviously. And I think it's a special counsel. I think a special counsel is necessary to review this entire matter, because we're not even including the Bruce Orr situation or any of that. You add all of that together, and I think it needs to be an outside counsel.
Well, what happens if you know that this is a Democratic bought and paid for dossier, and you know the information is false, and you don't disclose this to the judge on 4 separate occasions? Now, if I was the judge in this case, I think I would be pretty angry about all of that.
Yeah. So, you know, first of all, 50 U.S.C. requires all applications for warrant. They're under oath. Of course, you can't commit perjury. But more than that, I think, is what's at stake here is the fact that they utilized this information, knowing it was not truthful, knowing it was unverified, not notifying the court of the entire process of what went on here. But they didn't do it once. They didn't do it twice. They did it 3 times. And then James Comey, again, going to the president-elect of the United States and saying, hey, there's this dossier out there. I'm not trying to do a J. Edgar Hoover. Those were, by the way, James Comey's words. I'm not trying to do a Hoover on you here. It's unverified. It's salacious. You're not under investigation. But yet he utilized that again to obtain the warrant. As he's telling the president, it's not significant. It doesn't work both ways. Yeah. All
right. This is because you're saying that he used this, what he called in front of then President-elect Trump, unverified and salacious dossier. 2 months earlier, he used to get the warrant to spy on the Trump campaign and then the Trump transition team. So the level of duplicity, which is it? Because if you thought it was unverified
you don't get both.
and salacious, and you presented it to a court and you signed off on it, and that was the determining factor, as you point out, it was denied first in July, then James Comey has a big legal problem, doesn't he?
I think he does. And Christopher Steele, by the way, came to the FBI in the time frame of that looks like it was around July. So Christopher Steele, the so-called, British spy that was getting this information, by the way, who was working on it with him? Bruce Orr, the number 4, his wife, who's working, happens to be for Fusion GPS on this project. So, again, I say this. If there was a need for a special counsel, this is one of those moments because, unfortunately, again, this is not the rank-and-file FBI members. You've been very clear on that. I've been clear on that. But and this isn't deep state, as people call it. This is the top. This is leadership. So, again, yeah, James Comey doesn't get it both ways. He can't make the statements he made and then go back on it to get a warrant. I mean, he got a warrant based on this information. And I don't care if someone's a Republican, Democrat, Independent, Libertarian, Green Party. That's not the way it works in a constitutional republic.
Let me go to the very end of the memo when they talk about Andrew McCabe and his testimony in December of 2017 that no surveillance warrant would have been sought from the FISA court, but for the dossier information. The Democrats have tried to jump on that and say, oh, he didn't exactly say that. Well, I've checked with numerous sources on the committee that have confirmed he was asked this question multiple times, and actually his answer is far worse than what the memo actually states in this particular case. That, in fact, they wouldn't have sought this in any way without the dossier. So this is the situation, Jay. You've got Hillary Clinton, a bought and paid for, and of all things, dossier full of Russian propaganda. Wow, pretty ironic when you think about it.
Yeah, and the McCabe statement is very significant. Yep.
Okay, but it's to lie to the American people to influence the election, which ratchets up the typical lying that's done in political campaigns. But then it's used to obtain a FISA warrant to spy on an opposition party and an incoming president. Now, we've studied Watergate.
This is done by an FBI director who, remember, Democrats were calling for his removal when he intervened. And by the way, I was very critical of his intervention into the political process. I thought that was absurd what he did, that three-stunt maneuver he did in the summer, then in the fall in the election, which is what is against the FBI's rule, and where he conflated his job as FBI director and became the super attorney general, which is not his function administratively or procedurally, yet he did that. And I was very critical of that. But this is what he did.
Last
question. Again, those people that are defending James Comey should go back and remind themselves of what they said, a year ago, year and a half ago.
It's interesting. Would we have had the special counsel but for all of this, Jay Sekulow?
Well, there's the question, so the question is, did this dossier lead to create this investigation? And that question is a real question that I think has got a significant legal consequence, and that is the underlying question. Did this, in this case, FISA warrant, start this investigation? And again, I can't opine on that. I'm not going to. But I will tell you this. It raises serious questions.
All right. Well, I believe it did. And that gives justification. If I was General Flynn tonight and my lawyers, I'd be in a room tonight coming up with strategy. Same with Paul Manafort. I believe it should be disbanded, but I won't drag you into that. Good to see you when we come.